What's up, everyone? This segment of Tell Me About It, Tara, is brought to you by the Holy Happy Hour. I'm Tara, and today I'm going to talk to you all about what we should do when we doubt God's existence. Or if we want to believe that God exists, but we really struggle to, or we've always believed that God exists, but now we're having a really hard time because of trials, circumstances, crosses, whatever it is. Sometimes difficulties in life can make us question whether or not God exists and whether or not He loves us. So it's pretty funny because I recorded this video originally several weeks ago, maybe even over a month ago. And for whatever reason, the video didn't load and it wasn't uploaded in time. So here I am re-recording, and as I'm sure you all probably can imagine, I don't just ad-lib. I'm ad-libbing right now, but I don't just like improvise my videos. I typically read and prepare, and then I write out a script. But it's funny reading this script that I wrote for this show because now I'm like, I don't know, maybe I should say some different things. So hopefully this video ends up being better than the initial one. But anyway, I want to talk about this question of what we should do when we doubt God's existence. And this can happen for a number of reasons. Maybe you were not raised to believe in God. It wasn't just part of your family's culture. Maybe you were, but you have come to a point in your life where you've encountered suffering, whether that's on a personal level or a wider level. Maybe you're seeing the evil, the suffering in the world, and you're wondering how can God let this happen? And I think that we need to just admit that this is actually a wider spread problem than it seems. I think it's fair to say that Western culture in general struggles with doubting God's existence. Even people who have been faithful Christians, we get to this point at some point, and typically, almost always, it's a very painful experience. And so if you are listening to this video or you're watching this video and you're like, man, that's me. I doubt God's existence. And I'm really struggling to believe that my life has meaning or has purpose. I just want to say that I'm sorry because it's just the worst. It's just the worst when we don't know where we are headed. So let's talk about what we should do when we are encountering this burden of faith growing cold, not having faith at all, wondering what the point is of even having faith. Because again, this is a really painful experience. And I think if you haven't watched the Sloth and Faith video yet, I just want to say that there is a tie between, there is a connection between doubting God's existence and not believing that our lives have meaning or purpose. There is a connection. If we don't believe that God exists, then who made us and why? And does anything happen after death? If not, then what's the point of anything I'm doing here? So do you see? There's a connection. So what happens? What happens when we get stuck in our own ego? What happens when we get stuck because this is what happens when we doubt God's existence, when we doubt meaning and purpose for our lives. We can start turning inward and we can start getting locked up within our own ego because we become so concerned about ourselves and about our lives. So when I initially wrote this script for this video, it's because I was at the gym. Hashtag get swole. And on a whim, instead of listening to one of the multitudes of gym playlists that I have, I decided to listen to an audiobook. I now know why I don't listen to audiobooks when I work out at the gym. They're not particularly motivating. Sometimes you really need hype music. But anyway, this particular day at the gym, I'm getting hyped because I'm listening to an audiobook of one of my favorite theologians, Fulton Sheen. And he wrote this book called Your Life is Worth Living. And it's so funny because I wrote this video as an inspiration from one of the things that he shares within his book. And he talks about this problem of our present age, that we have an excessive love of speed, or rather we love excessive speed. We move so fast all the time. I live up here in New York. I'm telling you, it's like 3 times speed up here. In Oklahoma, where I'm from, it's like 0.5 speed. But in New York and really even in the rest of Western culture, we're just moving constantly. We don't stop to look around. We don't pause to reflect. We just keep going. We're always going. And even when we aren't in motion, so say maybe you're not physically moving, you're sitting still, you're still moving in some way because you're distracted with something or other. You're looking at your phone, you're watching that show, you're listening to something. We're just always doing something. We're always moving quickly, headed somewhere, but we don't actually know where we're headed and why. And Fulton Sheen says that many people are suffering from what he calls an existential neurosis, which he defines as the anxiety and the problem of living. And it's this anxiety and problem of living that keeps people from being truly happy. And he says, you'd think that I'd tell you that the remedy to this existential neurosis is to just get on your knees and pray to God. And he says, I will tell you to do that, but later. So there are 2 solutions that Fulton Sheen proposes to this problem of self-centered egoism that we all suffer from. And we suffer from it because of the stain of original sin, but we also suffer from it because sometimes when we don't have a deep relationship with God, or when we are doubting his existence, or even just the individualistic and secular culture that we live in encourages us to be asking all the time about my own satisfaction. Advertisements, things that we see in marketing and stores, ideas, it's all about you. It's all about you. It's all about you being happy, you being comfortable, you being fulfilled, you being satisfied. And gosh, when we're constantly and surrounded and inundated with you, me, yeah, we're going to have this existential neurosis. We're going to become so fixed on ourselves that it actually leads to an anxiety and a problem of living. So he says there are 2 solutions to this. And typically, we can become when we become so self-centered and so focused on ourselves, we suffer more, we have more anxiety, and we do this. We look inward because we're looking for meaning and purpose. And when we lack that meaning and purpose, we look inward. So it's this like cycle. I look inward because I'm lacking meaning and purpose, and because I'm lacking meaning and purpose, I'm looking inward, and I think that it's possible that I just repeated myself and said the exact same thing, but just go with it. So anyway, the problem is we're too focused on ourselves. So this is what Fulton Sheen says. If you're too focused on yourself, you're struggling to believe that God exists. Because you struggle to believe that God exists, you're suffering, you're focused. The whole point is it's too much about us. And that's why I'm making this video. It's too much about us. So here's what to do if you're too focused on yourself for whatever reason. Number 1, go out and help your neighbor. He explains that this is the solution because those who suffer from an anxiety of life only live for themselves. That whole thing I just did, yeah, it's because we only live for ourselves. Our minds and our hearts have been so, he uses the words like dammed up, like we've stopped the flow, and we've just halted. We've put up this obstacle, this barrier to the needs and goodness of others. We're not looking at anybody else because we're so focused on ourselves. He says, if you want to stop being focused on yourself, go out and help your neighbor. The easiest way out of this anxiety that plagues us is that we need to just go love others, we need to help others, and we need to go serve others. Now, this actually in and of itself is pretty countercultural. If we're talking about all of the messages that we hear, that we're inundated with about me, my happiness, my comfort, my satisfaction, there's not a lot that says, actually stop thinking about yourself. You thinking about yourself is actually what's causing your unhappiness. Go serve somebody who is in need. We very rarely hear that. But that's what I want to tell you guys today. If you're struggling with this anxiety and self-centeredness, go serve your neighbor, because I guarantee you there is somebody who is next door who is in need. And Fulton Sheen says that this has to come first. We have to go help our neighbor first. He's like, if you're struggling with believing that God exists, if you're struggling with believing that your life has any purpose, going and praying to a God that you cannot see doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you can't even go be with the person who's right in front of you who is in need that you can see. So I'm not going to counsel you to go pray if you're struggling to believe that God exists. Neither does Fulton Sheen. But we both say, me on behalf of Fulton Sheen, we say go serve and help your neighbor. Again, because if we can't love the people in front of us that we can see, how can we be expected to love a God that we cannot see? And Fulton Sheen goes on to say that the poor and the needy, they give us this strength, and they give us this peace that is like a healing balm that is placed over the anxiety that we feel over our own lives. The second thing that Fulton Sheen says, if you're struggling to believe in God's existence, if you're struggling with this existential neurosis, is to leave yourself open to experiences and encounters from the divine, which will come. So if you, right now, watching this video, don't know that God exists, struggle to believe he exists, kind of want to believe, but kind of don't want to believe, you're not really sure, leave yourself open to experiences, encounters from God. Because guess what? They will come. Jesus says that if you seek him, you will find him. You will. He doesn't hide. He wants to be found. The problem is, we become so focused in on ourselves that we stop looking for him, and we just are constantly self-seeking. So stop looking for yourself, stop looking for your happiness, stop looking for your comfort, stop looking for your satisfaction, and go seek God, who desires to reveal himself to you, who desires to make himself known to you, and who wants to be found by you. He does. He wants a relationship with you, but he's not going to force himself upon you. He's going to wait. He's going to wait until you search for him and until you desire to find him. So leave yourself open to those divine impulses that may lead you to encountering God or experiencing something as coming forth from him. And it just doesn't matter how far you may think you are from God, because God can close that gap in a second. So leave yourself open to meeting him, even if you struggle to believe that he even exists. Sheen says something so good. He says, you will not just reason yourself into the meaning and purpose of life. You can't just intellectually tell yourself your own meaning and your own purpose. You will act yourself into the meaning and purpose of your life by breaking out of the shell of your egotism and your selfishness. So for those of you who are watching this show and really struggling to believe in God's existence, Sheen says, to your consolation, you would not be seeking God if you had not already in some way found him. So if you're watching this video, guess what? You have already in some way found God because you are looking for him. There's this beautiful, beautiful story that I read months ago about this Chinese missionary named Brother Yun. And I have a heart for missionary stories because I myself am a missionary. And Brother Yun, so he was Chinese and he also evangelized in China, but he lived a life very similar to St. Paul. He was imprisoned many, many, many times. And I think Brother Yun can offer us a really great example of what we should do. There are a couple of ways that we can respond to suffering. One is to turn inward, which is what this whole video has been about. We turn inward because we lack meaning, we lack purpose. We don't know where else to go because of that lack of meaning and purpose, or because we're struggling to believe that God exists. And so we can turn inward if we're suffering, or we can turn outward, which is what Fulton Sheen suggests for helping us to break that cycle of anxiety about life. And so Brother Yun gives us this great example of how we should suffer well. And so he preaches the gospel, he evangelizes, and he gets imprisoned over and over and over again, and he gets tortured and he gets beaten. But while he's in prison, that would be the opportunity when he could turn inward and he could start to doubt God's existence. Well, God, I've been preaching the gospel. I've been doing your will. Why do you permit me to be imprisoned? He could go that route. But instead he goes the other route and he says, well, like, what a share in Christ's sufferings to be imprisoned for the gospel. And furthermore, he starts to minister to the people in the prisons because he realizes that he's not the one who's enslaved. The ones who do not know that God exists and that God loves them, those are the ones who are truly enslaved. And so he ends up converting the people in the prisons, and God miraculously helps him escape from prisons, I think, a handful of times. But that is how we should suffer. Instead of turning inward and doubting God's existence because he permits trials and sufferings, we should look outward and say, my faith cannot be taken away from me. No matter how many trials or sufferings I endure, it can't be taken away. I choose to freely believe that God still exists and that he loves me and that he's going to draw forth good out of whatever I'm encountering. And Brother Yun is a great example of that. If you want to read about him, the book is called The Heavenly Man. I loved it. I highly, highly recommend it. So that's what I have to share with you all today about if you're just experiencing that anxiety of life. Look outward towards helping your neighbor and open yourself up to seeking God and to receiving him wherever he is. If you are experiencing suffering, turning inward is only going to make it worse. Turn outward towards your neighbor, open yourself up to God, and know and believe in the hope and in the truth that God does work all things good for those who love him. You've been watching Tell Me About It, Tara, brought to you by the Holy Happy Hour. Thank you guys, and I will catch you later.